Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampirism, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host for tonight, Mark Johnson. Our regular host, Irene Allen Block, is still feeling a bit under the weather, so she's taking the night off. Hopefully she'll be back with us next week. Hope everyone's been having a good time with the weather's starting to get a little bit warmer. I mean, here in the Northeast, we're going to be tracking up to 60 degrees the next couple of days. So that 3 feet of snow I got about 2 weeks ago hopefully will be gone by the end of the week. I know there's still some cold spots going around the country with other folks, but spring is literally around the corner. I don't care what that groundhog said. So, hope everyone is doing well, especially with, coronavirus still out there. We've got vaccines being distributed, and so I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that more things will be opening up soon, because I really miss eating in restaurants. I miss going in and getting a good steak. So that's on my bucket list. Just wanted to mention the Paranormal UK Radio Network has just picked up a new show that will be starting with us probably by next week. It'll be called the Paranormal Pendle Podcast, and that is going to be hosted by Craig Bryant over in the UK. Now, Craig is an author of his own book, The Shadow Man of Accrington, and we're really happy to have him aboard. Right now, I think he'll be doing bi-weekly shows, but as soon as we have more information and when his first show will premiere, we will let you know. But Craig, welcome to the network, and we're excited to have you. Now, tonight, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is the subject of alternate history, or history that doesn't quite fit in with what we were taught in school. And our guest tonight is the author of several books, editor of Forbidden Science and Forbidden History. He's also wrote Forgotten Origins, Rescuing Order from Chaos, and he's also been the publisher of the Atlantis Rising magazine for many years. And he has a brand new book that's coming out the end of this month, March 30th, called Ghosts of Atlantis, How the Echoes of Lost Civilizations Influence Our Modern World. So we want to welcome Doug Kenyon to the program. How are you, Doug?
Good. How are you, Mark?
Good. Thank you for coming on. Now, I, of course, have heard a lot about a lot of your other books that you've written. And again, this topic of our past and humanity's past is something that has always fascinated me. We've had the opportunity to interview a lot of different folks over the years talking about this subject. So really interested in talking with you, since you've been working on this subject for quite a long period of time. So let's just briefly go in. What made you want to start researching and looking into, as we call it, alternative history? That's what's outside of what mainstream historians teach us.
Well, when I first ran across something that got me into the idea of history was not what it had been presented as, that there was a missing piece somehow or other, particularly the idea that there had been a dark age or so forth, the idea that between now and sometime in the past, there had been a period of where everything had been forgotten. I was thinking about the way, during the Renaissance, people rediscovered Greek history and Roman history that had been more or less forgotten during the preceding period. And suddenly you had springing up, and this was really the key to the Renaissance, was the awakening of classical knowledge. And I saw this and I realized that was probably true on a much grander scale than we realized. And that what we had, we've lost something much bigger. And I thought in terms of, as you climb up a mountain or as you climb up hills, as you surmount each hill, suddenly you see a vista before you that was missing before. And you and the larger and larger pictures keep emerging. And for some reason or other, I'm trying to remember what it was that I read some books talking about Atlantis. This was way back in the 70s, and I was just triggered by the idea. It got me very excited, and I started thinking about the implications of it all. And I got interested in the idea of reincarnation in particular because I saw that whoever we are right now was really a continuation of something that had been in motion for a long time. And I think people tend to look at these things as flashes. They see what's happening today and they don't see it in context with what happened yesterday and the day before, and they lose the thread. And that's one of the reasons we get ourselves in a lot of trouble, because we've lost sight of the continuity. And this is back to this concept that I was trying to get across about climbing up the hill and then seeing larger and larger vistas before us. But anyway, the idea just kept growing, and I kept thinking about it more and more, and I kept doing more and more things related to it, and it just became the theme that of my life, and it's been that way ever since. And that's been 40, 50 years.
Wow. Well, I will say you've touched on a myriad of topics that have always fascinated me. And, again, I've had an opportunity to talk with a lot of different authors and researchers over the years, plus doing my own research when, you mentioned the Renaissance, and one of the things that really came out of the Renaissance is the dark age of the dumbing down of humanity, with the advent spread of the major religions across the world at that time. Regular people were only taught to, what was in the Bible. That was history. And even like the Greek and Roman history was only reserved for a lot of the elites to look at, and a lot of it was lost. And in the Renaissance, a lot of this started coming back up, and then science started coming in, and we started realizing that, not only was the Earth not flat, but we had the whole solar system, and that there were other the stars in the skies were really suns, and our universe just started to expand. But then also a lot of those scientists like Galileo were persecuted by it or made to recant by the church. So we still had a long way to go, but it started to show that what we've been taught, just, a lot of it was designed in a way to keep us dumb down and not know who we are. And more often than not, I've heard the term not only from very spiritual people or people like psychics or channelers who channel spiritual beings, or even from people who are UFO experiencers and have dealt with extraterrestrials. There's this term, humanity is a species with amnesia. And we don't know who we are and what our true history is. So the more I've looked and researched, the more fascinated I've become in seeing that even modern science, what they consider to be our history and what's taught in the universities and a regular school, they seem to think, mankind has only been a civilization for about 5,000 years, going back to the Sumerians. When now we're finding evidence that there was civilizations going back tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years.
Yep, you got it. I think that people, one of the people who really was the leader in this development was Immanuel Velikovsky. And his book, which was Mankind and Amnesia, I read in the 70s, and it really got me going in regard to these ideas, because he was able to point out that the condition of the human race is really one of psychosis. It's not... and the struggles that you're talking about between light and darkness, between awakening and being in a coma, that struggle is still going on, and it's been going on all along. And awakening to this is the key to understanding. Are you familiar? Familiar with Velikovsky's book, The Mankind and Amnesia?
I have to admit,
Amnesia, I guess it is.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm not, until I was reading, the excerpts on your book on Amazon. I have not heard of him before, but I have heard the concepts coming from.
Well, the whole idea of catastrophism, or that the story of Earth has been punctuated by these catastrophic events, and recent ones, not just in the very, very ancient past, but in the last few thousand years, like, for example, what brought down Atlantis. This is the fundamental idea of catastrophism, and whereas the main school of thought is gradualism, or that everything going on now is going on the way it has always been going on. And it's important to realize that there have been very destructive events that have obliterated our memory. And this is how we came by the amnesia. We didn't suddenly, we were shot into the state of forgetting things, rather than simply, it didn't just, the light didn't just fade out. It was put out in a flash. And then we've had to, we go through a long period of trying to recover from that. Of course, it's brought, the destructive event is actually you can talk about what causes it. And that gets real complicated, because you can either talk about natural causes, like some events, like the classic example would be like the flood of Noah, or the event that Plato described as bringing down Atlantis and ending it in a single day or a single night. These kind of events are the things that scarred us and left us, bewildered. And one of the things here, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole, but one of the things that we talk about in the book is there's a book by a novel called science fiction novel called called the Canticle for Leibowitz. I don't know if you ever read it, but it was very popular in the 60s. But it tells the story of a group of I started to say nuns, priests, or kind of who basically have trying to preserve the records that they still have of an age that happened hundreds of years before. Only it's been forgotten, and they have only the vaguest recollection of what it was, and they're trying to put the pieces back together. And this occurs in the book. It's happening in the future as people are recalling an age that went through a nuclear destruction in our time, which is what they feared so much in the 60s. Not to say that they shouldn't anymore, but at any rate, this was the background for their experience, and it helps to understand how the way that we reconstruct our past, or the way we try to understand things, how it's really, I want to say, wounded, or it's not. It's a difficult struggle, and we have, and we devise all kinds of devices and all kinds of explanations for what happened that are essentially distortions of the original thing, and penetrating through all of this to an actual understanding of what happened is what we're trying to do. And of course, the result of that experience is that we are haunted, and I think of the term that comes to my mind is a haunted house, and that Earth is like a haunted house, and everybody is. You have the records of traumatic experiences that have been that basically have scarred us. And we're trying to work our way through this, and we're trying to put it together and understand what happened. But we're wounded. We're psychologically and spiritually. And it's the task that we have is to recover from this wound so that we can get the big picture. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, you see what I'm driving at there.
It does. But one of the other things that I also lean towards is the fact that history. What's the old saying? History is written by the winners, and history is also changed to suit, whatever society norms or beliefs happen to be available at the time. I mean, I could point to what's happening right now, where people are trying to erase history and change history because they don't like what happened in the past. But
absolutely.
And if you look at, let's say, like the early Christian church, they changed a lot of things. When they put together the Bible, most Christians don't even understand that the Bible didn't exist till like 300 something after the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople, where they picked and chose which books were going to go in and which books they didn't like, because it said stuff like reinforced like reincarnation. It did anything that took away their power. So mankind, these men chose what we were to know and what we weren't to know. And it's true of history and how things have been rewritten over time and sanitized. And so sometimes if you go back more than a couple hundred years, it starts to become, the farther you go back, the harder it is to know what the truth is, because we only know what we're being told without a lot of firsthand accounts or documentation to prove it. I I had a great example here, and now I'm having a brain freeze. But if you look at, just for example, they talk about Sumerian civilization, and they as looking at that's the first civilization, and yet now we have sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is being dated about 12,000 years ago. Pumapunku up in Peru, which has also been dated about 12,000 years ago. And there's a lot of evidence of these advanced civilizations that existed, and there was a cataclysm about 12,600 years ago, whether you want to attribute it to the, quote, flood, which most cultures and societies around the world have their own flood myth. But they do recognize that there was some kind of catastrophe. And we
touch on all of these things you mentioned, where every one of these points are things that we discussed in the book, and we are in complete agreement with your point there. And I think you'll find the book supports your point of view a lot.
There's a lot about humanity, and I always look at, I'm one of these geeks, because there's the meme running around I've seen on social media before, that if you're still upset about the destruction of the library at Alexandria, you're really a history geek. and that's me, because with the destruction of that library, which held countless scrolls and books and volumes, vast knowledge that we're never going to get back. And who knows what we lost? We don't. And that's where the amnesia comes in. It's been lost to us.
You're right. That's absolutely true. And that's another chapter in the book that you, I think you'll enjoy.
Yes, yeah. So again, it's we can't take what we're being told at face value. I've seen too much. I've talked to too many people. I've seen too much evidence that, our history is not what we are being told it is. And there are so many fascinating things to learn about our history. Are you familiar with Brian Forrester?
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah.
And he certainly, he's, as far as the ancient technology is concerned, he's definitely on track there. I agree with him.
One of the things that he's always impressed me, I've always followed his YouTube channels and the videos he's made, and I've had the opportunity to interview him too, is how he'll show with a lot of these older megalithic sites, especially not only in Egypt, but in Peru and Bolivia, sites like Tiwanaku, where the older the building construction, the better it was. So those big, massive megalithic blocks that weighed tons, that seemed to be laser carved and formed and fit together without mortar, that we could hardly even move today. In fact, a lot of the stones we still can't move today. They don't know how it was done. And yet later civilizations came along and built on top of them, and every civilization that built on top of it, the construction methods got more and more and more primitive, till we get to like the Aztecs, who were just laying stones and mortar and whatnot, because that information, that knowledge was gone. Either they forgot it, or they came later on and it was a different civilization that existed before the Aztecs showed up.
You can look at where the Incans built on the, like in Sacsayhuaman and other places in Peru there, you can see clearly the degradation of the Incan construction compared to the megalithic, which was upon which it was built, and the sophistication and the development of the old is far superior, and that's what you run into everywhere in Egypt and all of the ancient sites, the older is superior in most respects.
Well, I've all these old ancient sites that have been discovered so far, even I think above Göbekli Tepe, which is, incredible in its own right and on the age and construction. But Pumapunku in Peru is probably the most fascinating site to me because of those famous H blocks were made with such precision that copper tools could not cut through that andesite granite, which was so hard. And even if it could, making such perfect lines, perfect etchings,
it was clearly high tech. Yeah.
Clearly high tech. Drill holes. How did they make the drill holes that would go through? Not to mention these blocks almost looked like they came out of molds. And razor sharp, too. And a lot of the blocks give off a high amount of magnetism. Brian has filmed himself on many times putting EMF meters in these blocks and watching them spike, that they're full of magnetic energy. So, but the fact that...
just did a story on our own site. It's not part of the book, but they just did a study in Mexico or in the Olmec area there, showing how that the so-called potbelly sculptures, which you may or may not be familiar with, are basically aligned with their magnetic fields. So, for example, you have like the navel of a particular figure is aligned with the center point in the magnetic field, when they weren't supposed to be able to attract that at all. Same thing was true in like in Avebury. The magnetic fields, the North Pole of each one of those stones at Avebury points to the next stone. So it was clearly a conscious effort to align the magnetic fields. And it's whether the technology was what we would call technology today or not isn't clear, but it may have been what some call soft technology, or something that was more kind of psychic in nature or more spiritual in nature, but they had a way of doing things that is equal to or superior to what we have now. And that's what you see.
Yeah, again, there's so much of this that just enthralls me, because I'm one of these people. I want to know. I really want to know what happened, what went on here. Now, there's a lot of different theories. There's, of course, the ancient alien theory, and, proposed by Eric von Daniken in his original book, Chariots of the Gods. And then, of course, now we have the popular TV show where Giorgio Tsoukalos, I always have to crack up when he says, it was aliens, extraterrestrials. And while I believe in extraterrestrials, and I do believe they had a part in our development in human history, I don't believe that they're responsible for everything. My gut is telling me that we had very advanced human civilizations.
I agree, yes.
And whether that knowledge was learned and gained, because here's something else that people need to consider too. Okay, anything man-made, I mean, even the pyramids, okay, are eventually, in a few thousands or tens of thousands of years, are going to be gone. Okay, through natural erosion and weathering, anything that is here built by man eventually is going to disappear. So who is to say that there has not been ancient civilizations on this planet going back hundreds of thousands, if not maybe millions of years? And we could have seen the rise of very advanced civilizations, and then, as you mentioned earlier, a catastrophe happens and pretty much knocks us back to the very beginning, and we got to start all over again. And
have you heard the Silurian Hypothesis? It's the idea that dinosaurs themselves were at one point evolved beings and that they went through many millions of years ago. They went through evolution. It's not to say I think this is necessarily plausible, but I do know that a couple of scientists, I forget their names, did a study on that, and they said, well, we can't rule it out. And there was what was it? The TV series, Doctor. I want to say it was a science fiction show in the. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember
not Doctor Who.
Yes, it was Doctor Who that they had characters that were supposedly reptilians or basically from dinosaurs at some point in the far distant past. I'm not saying that this is necessarily anything that is of much value to us in contemplation, but when you think in terms of the vast spans of time involved, you have to realize that many things could happen and did happen and happened, many times. And that we only we're like looking through a keyhole in our present stage of awareness and seeing only a very tiny piece of the picture. And what we really need is a much larger perspective that can embrace many more possibilities.
Well, one thing that archaeologists admit to is the fact that the Earth has gone through not just one with the dinosaurs, but possibly several extinction-level events that have hit this planet in its existence. Exactly. So if let's say, and I totally agree with you that it's quite possible that during the time of the dinosaurs, which went on for 200 or something million years, before they went extinct, which I'm not convinced an asteroid did it. I think that there were other factors in play, but it's quite possible there was an advanced civilization. But if there was, the way the Earth changes, first with time, erosion, the Earth going through its changes, all evidence of that is wiped out. And all we have now are some bones that we dig up that are petrified. And that's not to say that's the entire archaeological record. It's only what, was lucky enough to petrify at that time. Another show, you mentioned Doctor Who, another show that kind of touched on that, there was that children's show back in the late 70s, early 80s, Land of the Lost, where the family goes through something while out on a river and they wind up back in time at dinosaur time. And then they encounter these like reptilian-like creatures, the Sleestaks. I don't know if you remember this show. And yet there was one Sleestak that they ran into that was intelligent. And through a series of different episodes and events, it was revealed that the Sleestaks that they were dealing with now, which were just like animalistic creatures, not really much thought, that was actually the ancestors of this guy. They used to be more intelligent, and then something happened and they de-evolved. And the same could be said for humanity, where we were much more advanced, and whether through these catastrophic events that affected the Earth or possibly even the solar system, which there's a lot of evidence some bad things happened throughout the entire solar system, we have de-evolved, and we lost a lot of our knowledge and even a lot of abilities that we used to have.
We had a great fall. And that's what that's really that's the crux of what we're talking about here, is that there is this continuing cycle of ascents and great falls that's occurred over and over and over again throughout the history of the planet, and that's what every time it happens, everything is wiped out, and we have to go back and start over again. However, it's worth remembering that the thread that keeps it all together is being maintained, but it's not something that we have ready access to on the conscious level because of our fallen state, and therefore to be able to tune into the records of this process is something that it requires spiritual advancement. It requires attention. It requires effort, and it requires commitment to trying to maintain a balance between the forces that we're contending with. That's something that we've lost the thread of. One of the things that we get into in the book is the idea of the Hall of Records. I don't know if you've, which is something that a lot of people think that might be there, which would give us the lost history of Atlantis or whatever realm may have been there. And there's actually evidence that something like that may have happened, and we talk about that. And I think that there's, Robert Schock talks about that, and he's convinced that there's something like that actually happened. He did a paper on it not too long ago, and we talk about it in the book. Where there's evidence that there's a hieroglyph which appears to show a key in the back of a recumbent lion, which actually he believes represents the Sphinx, and that indicating that there's something there. And and of course there are many stories describing this the Hall of Records, or this it's also, for example, in Edfu, for example, in Egypt, it's referred to as the let's see, I'm trying to find, let's see, where's the thing we talk, this is I'm just scanning through our own pages here to get to the core of this, but let me just take my word for it. It's in the book, and there's plenty of evidence for something like that.
And even Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, during a lot of the readings that he did while he was in a trance state, talked about not only Atlantis at great length, but also a chamber that is supposed to carry records of humanity's history underneath the paws of the Sphinx.
Right.
And I know Robert Schock and Robert Forster and other people, Robert Bivol, they've all had issues, especially with Zawi Hawass, who was, running the archaeological departments there for Egypt for many years. But there's a lot of mystery surrounding the Sphinx, and it seems like there's a lot of cover-up, too, that they won't look into certain areas of it, or if they found something that's disturbing, they've locked it away. Kind of like what the Vatican has done, where they, down in the catacombs in the Vatican, are supposed to be, miles of old records and pieces of our history that's kept away from the public. I mean,
we get into this in depth in the book. I just found the page that I was looking for here, which does include the Edfu text, the Westcar papyrus, the Dream Stela, and even references from Herodotus and so forth, all of which refer to could or seem to point to a Hall of Records. and which, of course, Casey was one of the most outspoken sources on. I can refer you to chapter 3 in the book.
Okay. Well, I definitely, when it comes out, I'm definitely going to have to read that. Something else that people also, our listeners, need to understand too, in regards to history. And if you look at stories told, not only in, I'll refer the Bible, there's a lot of stories in the Bible that places mentioned in the Bible have been found to exist. There are, going back to the Greeks and Homer, talking about the Trojan War and Troy. And it was always considered to be just, a fairy tale or, mythology until Heinrich Schliemann found it in the 1800s. And he found Troy exactly where Homer said it would. So nice. Then we have to look at if that's a possibility, then Plato's writings about Atlantis could equally be as accurate, but it's not taken seriously. Now,
you're getting into the very core of what this book is all about,
right?
And I mean, all of the issues that you raise are issues that the book is totally focused on, and we produce a lot of evidence that I don't think has been assembled in any one place before dealing with these topics, and I think you'll find it quite interesting.
Well, there's the two great big old civilizations that Western mythology talks about. You, of course, have Atlantis in the Pacific Ocean in the Atlantic Ocean, and Lemuria somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And, both were supposed to be very advanced societies, with Atlantis kind of losing itself spiritually and kind of going down a darker path and finally being destroyed, possibly by their own hand, by screwing around with something they shouldn't have been. Or there was legends of Atlantis and Lemuria fighting each other, the wars, supposedly. There's so much that we don't know. But let me ask you this, in your research, because I know you focus a lot on Atlantis, people call it the lost continent, yet it's also described as an island.
We talk about Lemuria a lot too, and Churchward and Le Plongeon and so forth, and all of their work in that subject, particularly in relationship to Gunung Padang. And are you familiar with that in Indonesia? I'm not as familiar with that. Yeah, well, it's really pretty powerful evidence that really can't be explained in any other way, and it's basically Lemurian in origin.
Now, would you consider in your research these locations being actual continents or islands, or some kind of city-state, or maybe even could it have been maybe floating structures, maybe a not a permanent Earth structure, but maybe large constructions like a big floating city or something? That it would make a lot more sense to me, considering since the sonar mappings that they do of the ocean floor don't really support the idea of a sunken huge landmass. So I'm wondering, I've always played with this idea that maybe Atlantis was a giant floating structure rather than an island in itself.
Well, I think that you're talking about ocean levels at the time of the end of the Younger Dryas, or the last ice age, being about maybe several hundred feet below where they are now. And the result is that there are coastal areas all over the world which were above water, and that are now underwater. And I think you're talking about a.
Okay, we've discovered the issue. There is a phone alarm ringing, but it's now off. So we'll get back into the discussion. So, again, I was mentioning something about possibly Atlantis and Lemuria being floating structures, and you were talking about the sea levels being a lot lower.
Yeah, the thing is that there was I think you're looking at an order or a worldwide civilization, and that was where you had all kinds of interconnections and so forth going on, kind of a maritime civilization. Actually, that's what Charles Hapgood talked about, and others, and that therefore the coastal regions were where this was going on, and the coastal regions were inundated by a rapid rise in seawater that wiped everything out. And most of the cataclysm that you hear, this is what it involves. So there are many aspects to it: firestorms and extinctions and events that really violently ended the previous era, the previous epoch. And anyway, that's one of the things that we talk about. There's plenty of evidence for that. The new evidence just in the last few years. This huge in Greenland, this bolide that there had been a problem for a long time. A lot of people who thought that there might have been some kind of spectacular strike from space is the inability to point to the kind of hole that it would have made in the Earth. And the thing is, they've now found that crater that they were looking for, one that appears to fill the bill in Greenland. So, and that explains a lot. And it coincides with the end of the Younger Dryas, and a lot of the evidence points in that direction.
There's also evidence of at least a solar system-wide catastrophe. I mean, if you take a real close look at our solar system, and again, I'm a big space nut. I'm fascinated with Mars and beyond, where it seems like there was some big events where Mars used to be habitable, and something happened which killed it, in essence. There used to be a planet between Mars and the asteroid field. I mean, in Jupiter, which is now the asteroid field.
We got a chapter on that too.
Yeah, and you know, when I look at Mars, the one feature that always stands out to me is the Mariner Valley, and how insanely straight that structure is. Despite all the erosion around the edge, it looks like something blasted that planet with either energy or something scraped along, but it just dug. That gouge is far too straight to be natural, in my opinion. And you know, there's just a lot of evidence, and I think you even mentioned, I was reading on the liner notes here, that a possibility of Earth and Venus possibly colliding in the past.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the Velikovsky's theory. Was he believed that Venus was actually a comet, and that it wandered through the solar system and basically came very close to striking Earth and ended up settling down as Venus. And that's very much something that catastrophists go along with, and to explain a lot of what you find on Earth today, both in terms of the that planet between Mars and Jupiter that was destroyed in some kind of out of an event that basically left the asteroid belt in the result. And if are you familiar with John Brandenburg?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's a nuclear physicist, but who's very much into these. Who's done a lot of work in this area, and he believes that there's plenty of evidence that Mars was hit with nuclear weapons in the past, in the very ancient past, and that he thinks that when we get to Mars, that's one of the things we'll be able to track. He's talking millions of years ago, but nevertheless, it's part of the story.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that fascinates me about Mars. Now, too many times people see the pictures from the rovers and they point at certain rocks and go, oh, that looks like a structure, or that looks like a pyramid, or that looks like this and that looks like that. And 9 times out of 10, I look at it and go, yeah, but it also looks like a rock. However,
I see faces in the clouds.
Yeah, exactly. What we call pareidolia in the paranormal community. But yet every now and then I see something that's just like, okay, that is interesting. Especially, I think the one that gets me the most is when they show pictures taken by the rover and it shows an object up in the sky. There'll be either a dot or some kind of spherical object that shouldn't be there. That always intrigues me, and how NASA let those pictures slip, I don't know, because there has been evidence of them tampering with pictures before they release them to the public. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there was, advanced civilizations on Mars, possibly even on Venus, and both of those planets somehow went through drastic geologic events where Venus could have been very Earth-like, but then had the runaway greenhouse effect. Mars, which supposedly doesn't have an electromagnetic field, and the solar winds blew away its atmosphere over time. But yet, I have problems with how they say how thin Mars's atmosphere is. They say it's so thin it's barely non-existent. Yet we can send the Perseverance rover out to Mars with a normal-sized parachute, and that's supposed to slow it down in such a thin atmosphere. Yeah, I have problems with that. There's a lot that just doesn't make sense to me. However,
we did a cover story in Atlantis Rising a few years ago. Why is the Martian sky blue? And because it is, certainly if some shots show the sky blue. Of course, it's hard to tell what. This is okay. I know what that is this time. Okay, I don't know. I'm going to have to deal with that. I shouldn't. Anyway.
Well, yet not only is the sky blue, I've actually taken some photos that NASA has posted, which looks to me like they put a heavy red filter over it. And I've adjusted the color so that the coloring on like the American flag or the symbol, the logos on the rover are true colors. And the second you do that, while the Martian landscape is red, the sky is blue.
Yeah.
And I could see the sky becoming red with dust storms if the winds are blowing. Again, with such a thin atmosphere, how they can cause such dust storms to cover the entire planet sometimes, I don't know. But again, with dust in the atmosphere, I could see it turning red. But on clear days, there's been enough evidence in photography to show that the sky is blue.
Yep. It's not something that they talk about a lot, but there are a lot of unanswered questions about Mars for sure. I mentioned that that the face on Mars, which originally Richard Hoagland talked about back in the what was it, in the 70s,
Yep.
and so forth, and then they produced all those photographs that made it look like it was a kind of a cat box,
which looked all Photoshopped to me.
Yeah, they were distorting. There was filtration going on that basically was not giving us a true picture of what the cameras were actually showing. And frankly, there were a lot of anomalies with that structure that were never really well explained, in my view. And we don't talk about that much in the book, but it's part of the mystery where the way that certain evidence is suppressed, and people are really kind of blocked from learning the kind of truth that would lead them in the direction that we're talking about here.
Which, again, goes to my point about how history is altered and changed to make us forget or make us not realize the truth. Right. Now, I'll only mention one last thing about Mars, because that's not really what we're talking about. But when you talk about the face on Mars, and, they came out with the later photographs which show it as it's all this mountain peaks or whatever, which look very fake to me. But the one thing they never explained is the outline of that mountain, supposedly, is almost perfectly symmetrical.
Right.
It's
parallel lines.
It's so symmetrical it couldn't be natural formation. I don't care if there was a face there or not. How it's in an oblong circle is too perfect to be natural. Now, you had mentioned about Mars possibly being nuked. And if you go back and look at the old Indian epics, oh my God, I'm going to butcher them because I'm suddenly brain freezing. The Ramadaya, the Hamambatra, and in these ancient texts, they talk about wars among the gods using these terrible weapons that sound exactly like nuclear weapons. These arrows that are shot and causing blinding light and great destruction, smoke and fire, and then shortly afterwards, people's hair and fingernails fall out. They start bleeding from orifices, and they're suffering from what sounds like radiation poisoning.
Yeah,
and so and that was here on Earth. So it's very possible that in our ancient past that possibly maybe some of these stories, even though they're told by different cultures, might be related to areas like Atlantis, just using different names on how they were destroyed.
The name Atlantis itself, even though that's in my title of my book, is a kind of a red herring. And that people get caught up in whether or not there was a specific place called Atlantis. But the important thing is that there was a culture, or there was a force field, or an order, and a civilization that existed that was worldwide, and that. Whether or not we have an accurate description of the politics, the political structures that were there, is beside the point. There was, humanity did evolve to a high point, and then something destroyed that, and that's what's important.
Let me ask you a question, because I know that you explore a lot of different structures, different locations around the world. But when we talk about Atlantis and Lemuria, we talk about them in the two different oceans and where they could have been located, and yet the one location on this planet that is the biggest mystery of all is Antarctica. And
We talk about that too.
Yep.
There's a whole chapter on that.
Yeah, and the fact that Antarctica was not always covered by ice. In fact, it was probably very green and lush, and who knows what we could find if we could ever get below the miles of ice. Was there ancient civilizations on that continent?
Well, Rand Flamoth, who we quote quite a bit on this, and he, of course, was writing about what Charles Hapgood had to say about it. And Charles Hapgood theorized in his Path of the Poles that the Earth, the crust of the Earth, shifted, and he thought maybe as much as 30 degrees, and therefore that an area that is now in a frozen area was in a temperate zone, and therefore, and that's, if you look at the map and you see a shift that big, it's clearly possible that though it would have been a cataclysmic event of a major on a major scale, I'm not sure I'm convinced of that anymore, though I've looked at it quite a bit, and I think there's certainly a possibility. And Einstein wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book on this, and basically endorsed the idea. So there's some scientific plausibility to it. And if that's the case, then Antarctica would be at the center of the world's oceans. You can see this if you look at a map from the South Pole. Mm-hmm. You can see how it would have been. It would have fit the much of what Plato described. However, I do think that that really what we're looking for is something where Plato described, essentially in the Atlantic Ocean to the west of the Pillars of Hercules.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing that history, they talk about the idea of moving tectonic plates and how the continents drifting. And there was the idea of one time Pangea, which with all the continents together and then through plate tectonics start drifting apart. And you can see how South America and Africa can kind of align, right. and how that all could have been part of one another. But what gets me is what they don't explain is if that were true, then Earth would be one of the most lopsided planets out there, where all the other planets are basically round. Earth, when the continents were together, you had one raised section of Earth that was a quarter of the planet, and the rest of it was all much, much lower in elevation, to the point where this whole section is sticking out. And it feels like the way nature works and the way with planet formations and spinning and with gravity, gravity tends to pull everything together more or less equally. Now, yes, we have volcanism, and it's very much a living planet. There's a lot going down in the center of the Earth that causes a lot of changes, and again, plate tectonics. But yet it seems to me that there's something wrong there. There's something wrong with the Earth that could have been caused, or in the past, some kind of disaster that took away a big chunk of the Earth. And then over time, with the formation of water and the plate tectonics moving the continents, it fills that in, but which is why the Earth has such deep areas and fills the ocean, fills it, and makes it look more spherical than it really is.
Well, they're talking about really vast epochs of time spread over, and this is the whole idea of gradualism that you get, which is to try to explain what we have as a product of very extremely excruciatingly slow processes spread out over vast eons of time. And who's to say what may or may not be the case? Frankly, I'm very suspicious of all this theorizing. I don't really think that it has, it doesn't have the kind of evidence that impresses me. That's one of the reasons that I very much am into the catastrophist school of thought, which accounts for things happening in sudden events, and that's really the story of life on Earth, is these catastrophic events that interrupt everything that's going on, not this extremely slow process spread over millions and millions of years. But it's the establishment, the scientific establishment, takes great delight in speculating about that kind of thing. But I have my doubts.
Well, as do I, and the fact that modern science in itself has become a type of religion, because anyone who tries to go outside of the established order of history, or as science has proclaimed, they're the ones who get defunded, or they don't get peer-reviewed, or they get ridiculed and run out on a rail, and because it goes against everything that we've been taught to believe. So there's no open-mindedness about, hey, maybe we need to look at things from a different perspective. And there's so much evidence out there that things are not what we seem. I mean, modern history still looks at Sumeria as the first civilization, and Göbekli Tepe, when it was discovered, blows that right out of the water.
Yep.
You also mention, you talk about things in the book like Easter Island, Rapa Nui, and the truth about Rapa Nui. What has been your fascination with Rapa Nui, other than the fact that the stone moai on the island have always fascinated me?
Well, I don't think there's another chapter in the book, and there's the explanation for what we find on Easter Island is totally missing. I mean, the moai, most of them are buried deeply in the earth, and that most of the earth was built up around them. We don't know how old they are, because we're only all of our aging is simply based on debris that we find in proximity to those statues, and we don't know how they were made, and we don't know how they were moved, and we certainly don't know where their language came from, and we don't know really much of anything about them. But Easter Island sits at a very critical place on the world's geography, and it's on a line which circles the world and crosses many of the key areas, including Giza and many others. And I think that it's astride of what was perhaps once an equator at one point, but that's another chapter in the book I refer you to.
Well, I mean, and that would make sense, because what we do consider to be our North and South Pole and the axis that the Earth turns on, there's a lot of evidence that has flip-flopped and changed positions many different times in the past. Not only the magnetic poles, which are constantly, especially these last several years, are moving at an ever-increasing rate, several degrees a year. There's always been a theorizing that we're about to experience a pole flip. And north can become south, south can become north, but the poles may not line up exactly where they could. You could have the North Pole could be in the middle of Europe, for all we know. The sun goes through these cycles. They've documented how the sun, every so often, the poles do a complete reversal. So it makes sense that the Earth, with its magnetic field, also will do a reversal. But could it also be that the actual axis of the Earth rotating in a different direction? And that could also be the cause of some of the disasters in the past as well, because if something like that were to happen, it wouldn't be gradual. It would be very quick, and being very quick, let's face it, it would cause a lot of hell and destruction until everything settles down.
Well, certainly in our electronic world, that kind of an event would literally put us back in the Stone Age overnight. And I hate to think what might ensue there if suddenly there were this huge electronic effect. One of the things that Robert Schoch talks a lot about is he believes that solar events and solar storms really account for a lot of the great cataclysms in the past, and he makes a pretty good case. You're probably familiar with that in the 19th century, I'm trying to remember what they call those, but
the telegraph wires.
Yeah. And as a result of a solar flare that completely upset everything. And if you had the very same event on the same scale happen now because of the electronics, it would be absolutely destructive to our entire civilization.
Well, yeah, I mean that's something that I've always been concerned about. I know. Always been a big fan of Art Bell when he was on Coast to Coast. I listened to a lot of the old podcasts all the time where he has Richard Hoagland or Major Ed Dames, whatever, and they talk about these types of things. And, that's, if there's one thing that I would be more nervous about than any other kind of disaster would be us getting hit with a major solar flare. Now, I know Major Ed Dames talked in the past about a kill shot, which was a solar flare that could literally wipe out all life on Earth. But even if we got hit with one big enough, that could fry our entire electrical grid. And let's face it, if all of our electronics suddenly went kaput, we would be in a lot of trouble because we as a society have become way too dependent on electronics and everything from computers and companies who are digitizing all of their records and going with a paperless society. Okay, fine. That electricity goes down. You get hit with an electromagnetic pulse that takes out the grid. You have no documents. You have nothing. You'd have no digital libraries. You have only books, and even there aren't a lot of those anymore. Yeah,
it'd be heaven forfend. Yeah, if we did a cover story a few years ago in Atlantis Rising on the EMP threat, and there's certainly just the idea that some bad actor could set off, it wouldn't even have to be a nuclear bomb that would actually blow up on ground, but simply that would set off that pulse up above a certain altitude, would completely destroy the internet and everything electronic.
Well, I know that the military has experimented with EMP weapons that do not require a nuclear explosion, but those types of weapons would be extremely effective against aircraft or tanks or anything else that requires all of these electronics and an over-reliance on them. talking about, you talked earlier about science fiction, and I'm also a science fiction fan. I'll point to one of my favorite shows was when they remade Battlestar Galactica for the Sci-Fi Channel a few years ago, and that gritty realism. But one of the things that they showed in there that I think they kind of hit the nail on the head was the fact that the Cylons were able to disable all of the electronics of the Colonials, shut down all their weapon systems, all their planes, everything, and then just made them sitting ducks. And that's the same thing that can happen with EMP weapons here, shutting down anything that uses electricity. And let's face it, every single piece of weaponry our military has is high tech. I look at soldiers going into battle in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world, and I see the amount of electronic equipment and crap that these guys have to haul around and carry, not like what they did in World War II or heck, even Vietnam. But it's such an over-reliance on technology that could be wiped out with a good EMP pulse.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly something to lie awake at nights thinking about.
Yeah, and getting off of that, when kind of getting back to Easter Island, and also it'll go Göbekli Tepe, is the fact that, when we talk about the moai of Easter Island that were buried, and again, most people don't realize that when they see these statues, that only like half of them, if not maybe even less, are exposed above ground. And right. I remember one documentary, they were trying to show how they could have moved these moai in place, and they had a fake moai, and it looked like all the ones that you see sitting around, and they had ropes tied to it, and they were rocking it back and forth to get it into place.
Yeah, there was a cover of National Geographic, which actually appears in the book, showing that people using this refrigerator rocking technique to move these, but that's absurd. These things are too big, and why would they need to move it?
Well, but the one that they used again is not the same size as. It doesn't take into account how most of these moai are, half of them or more are buried underground. They're very, very tall. They're so massive. Yeah. And they're purposely buried. That's what gets me. And that brings me back to Göbekli Tepe, is the fact that not only is that site about 12,000 years old and with very sophisticated building techniques and stone carvings of Crete, and especially not only those T blocks, but the animals and creatures on them, but the fact that the site looks like it was deliberately buried.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to ask yourself, why were they buried? Why was Göbekli Tepe buried, which helped preserve it for 12,000 years until now we're finding it and digging it up and excavating it?
Yeah, you're asking the right questions, and it certainly presents us with evidence that completely shatters the old paradigm of the hunter-gatherers being all you had on Earth at that time. Clearly, there was an advanced civilization that, Göbekli Tepe involves, what are they saying, around, there's about 30 unexcavated sites, just like the ones that they've already excavated that are spread out over that area. So it's really much larger in scale than people consider, and it is a complete game changer in terms of the evidence for pre-Diluvian civilization. Pre-Diluvian civilization is the issue. The pre-Diluvian meaning before the flood or before the end of the Ice Age civilization that rose to heights and then disappeared. As we basically uncover these things, we're slowly we'll be able perhaps to slowly reconstruct what really happened. But Göbekli Tepe is the key area right now. Of course, I think that the Gulf of Cambay and the Vedic civilization in India is another example, and that's also very well documented and on a scale which can't be explained.
Well, even the Sphinx in Egypt, in the Giza Plateau, the Sphinx, and you're talking about Robert Schoch, and he has pointed out on a number of occasions, I've seen a lot of videos and documentaries where he's gone out and pointed out where the Sphinx itself is far older than they think it is. Modern archaeology, it could go back 12,000 years or more, because there's evidence of rainfall and rain erosion, which there hasn't been that type of rainfall in the desert there for tens of thousands of years.
Actually, there are several sites, not only the Sphinx, that have that same kind of erosion feature that indicates that it predates the time when there were no before the rain falls before it became the dry desert that it is now, and so for example, John Anthony West used to talk about this. I can mention a couple of examples. One was the tomb of Kentkaus, which is on the Giza Plateau, and I've been there myself and photographed it. But you have a stone structure externally, and then you can see where beneath the surface, or where it's been broken out, you can see the underlying structure beneath, which clearly has this rounded quality, like resulted from rainfall, and that's been now covered over with repair stones that come from a very different era. And I saw one of those spots that I was actually I was present with John Anthony West in the Red Pyramid, in an area down beneath at the bottom of the Red Pyramid. There's a spot they call the burial chamber. It really has nothing to do with burial, but there is this pit where you have all these stones that were clearly of artificial construction, but they've been rounded, smoothed over by weathering, rainfall, and I suspected at the time that maybe the pyramid itself had been built over this spot to memorialize it in some way, and John Anthony West thought that was he thought that was plausible, and he liked that idea, but what I'm trying to say is that there are many such spots that are evidence of a pre-developed civilization that were wiped out, and what we see now is only is second growth, so to speak.
Well, if the Sphinx is as old as it looks like it is, predating the pyramids by 5,000 to 7,000 years or more. But even then, the pyramids themselves, as fascinating as they are, there's an entire layer taken off of all of those pyramids. So what you're seeing when you're looking at the pyramids, those stone blocks used to be covered by other stone blocks, which are now gone. A lot of it was used to help build the city of Cairo, but I think it makes it almost impossible to really date the age of the pyramids. They could be possibly a lot older as well.
But you can't date the stone. They have no way of doing that. The only thing they've ever been able to do is maybe date residue and so forth that they find on the surface, and then they use that Khufu cartouche in the King's Chamber, which Scott Creighton did some very interesting research on that. We do talk about this in the book as well. Evidence that the famous cartouche in the King's above the King's Chamber up there in Davidson's chamber, evidence that was actually painted there by modern archaeologists. It wasn't really authentic. That's something that gets Egyptologists very excited. We covered this in the story because there were a couple of German students, who tried to take a chip of paint from that cartouche and to take it out of the country and get it dated in Germany. And man, that caused an uproar.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people worked up. And that's another thing we talk about in the book.
They're very, very protective and of wanting to make sure that what the Egyptologists do not want their history upset. They say this is what it is. This is what these pyramids were, tombs, and which they weren't. And you can't upset the apple cart or ask different questions.
Well, don't suggest that anybody was involved who wasn't, a lineal Egyptian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty much a chauvinistic kind of argument.
Well, and again, you want to talk about the Egyptians. What about some Egyptians that were shown with very, very light skin? They almost look Caucasian. You had some, of course, that were very dark skinned, looked like when Nubia came up and conquered some parts of Egypt. The Upper Egypt, which on a map is really Lower Egypt, but there were different types of people there that weren't Arabic or Middle Eastern looking. They were Caucasians. There were mummies found with red hair. The hair is still intact. So the people that were there, we're only assuming what they look like based off of some paintings, but there's some evidence that they could have been Caucasian or something completely different than other people who are native to the area. You could have been, Edgar Cayce again. He did mention that there was an exodus after Atlantis was destroyed, that many of the Atlanteans relocated around the world, some to Egypt, and helped teach some of the locals there, some technology and whatnot to help build some of the great structures. But again, how long ago that was, again, I still think goes back, well over 12,000 or more years ago, before the classical period, which they keep talking about, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. So
one of the things that really fascinates me in this kind of subject, particularly in regard to reincarnation, is that the idea that people who would incarnate in one particular racial or one particular grouping would, in a subsequent embodiment, be in another group, perhaps one that was in other words, the oppressors of one incarnation would end up being the oppressees in another embodiment, and therefore that complicates things, and it gives a dimension to understanding what people are really up to unconsciously, other than simply being one political group.
Well, and that's a great point in that, and again, we've done whole shows on reincarnation, but just, for a quick summary, if that part of reincarnation is the case, okay, then at some point or another, we've all have been if we've reincarnated. And I've actually, done some hypnosis, and I've found a couple of past lives. So we have all been men and women. We have all been every race that there is on this planet. We've been in almost every culture at one point or another, because we're here to learn and we're here to experience. And
you got it.
You can have that, what they call karma. You think karma's a bitch, but in reality, it's learning from a different experience. You could be the oppressor in one life, then you can be the oppressed in another. And it's not because, you were bad in this life, so now you're being punished in this one. It's you're experiencing different experiences, but it all balances out. And that was something I had to learn spiritually.
You're getting the full picture.
Yep.
You're working your way around the clock.
Yep.
You're around the zodiac. You're basically getting each you go for a particular type of experience, and then once you've signed on for this, then you have to experience all of the various components that make it up, and you're not through with it until you've done all that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, which is why all this squabbling that's going on these days and pointing fingers and unfortunately the racial tensions we have nowadays, if people really understood who we are as not only a species but as spiritual beings, then race and gender, they don't matter.
That's right.
We are all spiritual beings having a human existence, and at one point or another, we've been all of those things. So, we need this. One of the reasons why we need to grow up and stop this petty crap, and all start to work together, because I think until we do, and we're not going to. From a spiritual concept, kind of getting away from the archaeological side of things, from a spiritual concept, our higher selves, we know everything already. We know all of the history. We know everything there is to know. It's learning to access it. And until we're able to put aside all of these worldly issues and go more within and learn to tap into that higher knowledge. You talked about like great libraries or whatever. Well, there's also the library of, they call the Akashic Records, or I think it's more of something that's more within our higher selves, that's buried deep down, that we need to learn to access. And all that was lost can eventually be refound, but it's going to take the work and getting past, our current problems, which I feel in a lot of ways humanity is continuing to de-evolve. And I'm not talking about technology. I'm talking about just people in general. We seem to be taking a big step backwards and not moving forward.
And that, of course, is the core of what this book is all about. And this is really the points you're making. I agree with completely. And we're trying to look at this as this quest for Atlantis is really being a quest for the soul. It's a quest for our own self-knowledge and for the knowledge of who we are and what it is we're up to. And that, of course, is what we need to figure out. And it's because we've lost track of that, and because we've fallen into this state of amnesia, that we have lost track of that, and we're lost until we can figure that, until we can find our way back there.
Well, this is why I really feel like this book that's coming out on March 30th, people, so mark that on your calendars. This book and the others like it, like when you're editing the Forbidden Science, Forbidden History books, the alternative history, people need to be more open to it and listen to some of these ideas. Yes, there's a lot of BS out there and that you're going to have to sort through, but you also have to, start being open-minded to these different ideas, and your higher self, your inner spirit is going to tell you, it's going to lead you in the right direction if you listen to it, if you allow it to help guide you. And we get past of all the dogma and programming that we've had since childhood, and learn to look at the world with new eyes. And
what we're saying is not without evidence. We've got a ton of evidence. In fact, that's a lot of what the book is about. We've got a lot of evidence that if you simply take a look at it, can make the case. You don't have to believe any of this on just faith. It's in just intuition alone. There's plenty of facts and information that it's only when you put it all together in one place that you can finally kind of get the big picture, and that's what we were trying to do.
Well, we are coming to the end of the program here, so again, I want to point people to this book, Ghosts of Atlantis, How the Echoes of Lost Civilizations Influence Our Modern World. And when this comes out on March 30th, Doug, where can people find it?
Well, it should be available wherever books are sold, and it'll certainly be available on Amazon. It's, in fact, you can go to Amazon right now and reserve a copy, and it'll be, and of course, hopefully it's going to be every place.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to reading it. And Doug, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I've had a blast talking with you. As I warned you before, this subject is right up my alley. In fact, I think I talk too much and need to talk more.
Hey, that's great. You know, you're right in you're in the choir for sure that we're preaching to.
Well, thanks for coming on, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. We will be back next week with an all brand new show, and I'm hoping Irene's feeling better and she'll be able to join me then. So everyone, until then, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.